Hello and welcome to the Catholic Nerds Podcast, your only source for quality Catholic nerdery.
Mm-hmm.
This is Scott
and Colby
and Mary
and Cody.
Have we
cool
researched?
Conversation. So we're done.
Have we researched that we're the only?
Well, that's a wrap.
Do we know for a fact that we're the only ones that make this claim to fame?
Colby told me to say that, so I'm relying on his research.
And I mean,
a historical figure once said, "If you say something long enough and loud enough, eventually people will believe it."
Isn't that Michael Scott?
Yeah, and if you
just wanted to make sure.
Yes,
if you hear it on a podcast, it must be true. You know.
I guess you're right.
That reminds me of the is that Winston Churchill quote, or maybe it's Voltaire, who knows? A lot clearly your only source for these things. That a lie can go completely around the world while the truth is still putting its pants on.
Oh wow!
Hey,
that kind of reminds me of we may actually have different takes on this, but that Covington Catholic boy.
Oh yeah.
You know, from the March for Life, and you know,
I read a little bit about that, but yeah, I saw another thing today about the Native American gentleman that was in the quote unquote confrontation.
Did you saw the thing where he was like interrupting a mass at the National Cathedral or something like that?
No, I did not see that. I saw supposedly his military background was in question. That news reporters were making false statements about his military history, and he never corrected them or refuted them. Supposedly he was a Vietnam vet, and he never actually served. Things like that.
I think he was in the military, but he was never deployed, I think is what they said.
Right. Right.
So yeah.
So is that the term when you get swift boated?
I don't know. Like
the John Kerry swift boating? I don't really know. I probably shouldn't use words I don't know.
How about back to our being the only podcast? So how about we keep with the rule that until the president declares us fake news, we're it.
Hey, I was really proud of the fake news people. Jake Tapper came out and said that the Covington Catholic thing was just wildly misreported.
Yeah. Well,
of course, that.
So the lawyer of the boys apparently served like literally every public figure who had tweeted anything or done anything and said retract within 48 hours or consider yourself served, and the retractions just started pouring out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I would have done.
Yeah.
I did see an article though. I didn't read it though, but supposedly there was a bishop wrote an article that, you know, wearing a Make America Great Again hat or a President Trump hat was not pro-life. And so the students, you know, their embodiment of being at the March for Life, yet supporting the president was contradictory.
Yeah. I mean,
they probably...
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go for it.
I personally thought it was really imprudent that the chaperones were letting them wear the hats because they're so politically charged, you know, at that event. But that then the whole situation was completely manipulated to serve, and you know that beyond that there really was, you know, obviously the situation was completely misrepresented and manipulated and stuff, and that at the same time I think you're right that it's ridiculous to say that if they're wearing the hats then they're not pro-life or something like that.
Right.
Do you think that they're all wearing that hat like, you know, all the different groups do to kind of
distinguish,
you know,
distinguish themselves?
Stay together. They just
I don't know.
Not
just like the BR white hats, right?
Exactly, yeah. Just kind of their own little twist on it, not particularly warm twist on it.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard much about that, you know.
When this doesn't help the argument, but I do know, you know, there's a subset of quote unquote guys who are interested in the frat life, because President Trump is very popular with fraternities.
Really?
Oh yes. And so anytime you see frat parties or anything like, you know, the media centralized fraternity attention, they're very supportive of President Trump. And so you see high school age guys who are, you know, interested in that type of life. You know, they aspire to be like that.
Gotcha.
So it does not surprise me that a parochial school, and a bunch of guys who eventually will be in college and probably in that scene, are trying to aspire to that already.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And we probably should say, for the record, that had these boys been harassing an elderly Native American gentleman, that would be deplorable, obviously.
Surely.
That
yes.
were...
They'd be
it's not
one
just
of the
deplorable
best.
that they wear
They'd be in.
hats. I mean, fashion
They'd be
choices,
in the-
people. Come on.
They'd be in the basket of deplorables.
But yeah.
And also how unfortunate it is we talk about, the March for Life never gets any real media coverage.
Yes.
But they got
I know.
this.
Oh yeah, so
Yes,
disappointing.
absolutely. I was so discouraged when the story broke because it was being so widely reported, and already it was clear that it was kind of being twisted a bit. But it was like, even if it's not, and it's deplorable, if it wasn't, it would be deplorable. But that they completely refrained from reporting on the march and then report on one little group's potentially bad behavior. Whereas at the Women's March, there's tons of people behaving very badly. And that doesn't get reported on at all,
Except for that Satanist group over there, they're very well behaved.
Yeah, completely. Satanists are always the best behaved people at the party.
Good
That's what I've
Lord.
heard.
So, speaking of abortion, to parlay this into a comics conversation, which, we can't really offend that many people talking about comics.
We've already offended enough people. So.
Challenge accepted.
Let's do this.
Because of how you talk about those comics.
It's true. We're not exactly talking about the Peanuts and our gang here. We're talking. Cody was going to talk about Thanos some more. We kind of talked about Mistress Death, Lady Death before in previous podcasts. But on the topic of abortion, there's some relevance to the Thanos myth arc.
Right. So we're going to actually kind of pull out of the comics a little bit because Thanos in the comics, his main goal for obtaining the Infinity Stones is so that he can be Mistress Death's equal instead of her slave and be with her forever, right? That's his whole purpose of gaining the Infinity Stones and wiping out half the universe.
It's a love story.
Okay, it's a love story. It really is.
Classic.
Valentine's Day,
In the line of
love story.
Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, very Shakespearean.
Exactly. And so, but we're going to move away from the comics and into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU, because that's really where Thanos' philosophical ideas come out of this myth of overpopulation. Now, regardless of what you think about overpopulation, it is a myth because we know that people tend to populate towards the cities, and that means that they become overcrowded and stuff. But there's still plenty of room, not just for people to live, but for people to cultivate the land. So, anyways, talking about Thanos in particular, his quote. He's explaining to Gamora in Infinity War like why he's doing what he's doing. He says, "Little one, it's a simple calculus. This universe is finite. Its resources finite. If life is left unchecked, life will cease to exist. It needs correcting."
So this is basically a statement of Malthusian economics,
Correct.
right? Malthus. Right, that population increases exponentially, whereas resources increase only arithmetically.
Right.
Right.
And so it's just interesting that this whole concept, right, of overpopulation, which in the pro-life movement is something that we've heard constantly. There's too many people. There's too many people. There's too many people.
What's the statistic that the entire population of the world could fit in the state of Texas?
Of the
With-
world.
That's crazy.
With the density, I think, of the city of New York. So it's not like we'd all be, I don't know,
On a mile plot
standing like shoulder to shoulder in the state of Texas, but like living in a Texas-sized city of New York.
That
Well,
makes
and
me.
I think, I've seen demographic maps that says like 80% of the population within the U.S. lives within 60 miles of the coast.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So if you look at a heat map, it's literally like, this huge highlighter going around the coast of the country. and then it's kind of very sparse in between, except for the big cities.
Yep.
So yeah.
Which isn't to say like that there aren't resource distribution problems, but
Correct.
we know
Right.
that the biggest enemy of resource distribution is political instability and war and things like that. That's really the main thing that robs people of the ability to have access to what they need, throughout the world.
I was looking at a chart just the other day, and I don't have the source for it, but basically they charted population growth since 1900. I think it was basically 1 billion to 6 billion, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And charted alongside it the numbers of those in extreme poverty, and they diverged as population growth increased as expected exponentially. The rate or the amount of extreme poverty was actually decreased.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Which, I mean, you can say, well, it's the Green Revolution, which, if we mention Green Revolution, we have to give a plug for those fighting Texas Aggies and Professor Norman Borlaug,
Somehow
Nobel
find a way to
laureate.
bring them in, don't you?
Weekend Aggies.
They are the crux.
You mean green as in like inexperienced and
Oh.
I'm
You
sorry.
mean an experience at saving the world?
I'm sorry.
Boy, yo, 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 yo.
So yeah, since we mentioned it, the Green Revolution. So Borlaug basically found a way to grow dwarf wheat. He made, I think, it was a hybrid of dwarf wheat and taller wheat. So he increased the production of wheat several times, several folds, so that you're able to have greater production with the same amount of arable land.
Right.
Which kind of shows.
Well,
I'm
that's-
sorry, Colby. You go ahead.
Gig 'em.
You've tried like.
Oh, so that was actually a point to what you said, Scott, about the population increasing. However, the density of poverty has also decreased. So the advances of technology and basically the economies of scale they go hand in hand. So you study any free market economist, they'll say capital follows opportunity. And so, back in the day, people, and even today, people talk about the evils of colonialism. That problem in and of itself is still today here, but it's very different in that, capital or resources goes to where there is a return. However, it always has, some type of purpose to give value to the consumer. So all these countries, even if it's not just, deploy charity, but one of the biggest movements right now within the financial space is called impact investing. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
So it's like microloans or
microloans. Yeah, it's kind of like microfinance, what they call it, but it's impact investing where, capital or, people who have money to spare try to invest in places that have some type of charitable end. So kind of like, I think we even talked about one time, you talk about shoes being made in Africa and being, shipped and sold around the world. Right. So it's giving resource and giving opportunity to people who did not have it before, as a way to give them means of living, but also, to return, economic opportunity to other places also.
Kind of like partly from the perspective of it almost being like an untapped market, but like an untapped labor market.
Exactly. Yes. And so, capital's being deployed there because nobody else is there. And so it's quote unquote an exploitation because there's no one else there. There's no real competition. However, it still does bring value to the communities that they're going to.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of that idea that like human beings are our greatest resource, like that the more humans we have, like kind of with what Scott was talking about too, like the ingenuity of humans, the more humans we have, the more people are tackling problems and working and,
Which is kind of a contradictory point to what we have in the States because we have people, we have a population, but we also have very advanced technology. And so the more we become dependent upon technology, the less we become dependent on other people.
Yeah.
Which is, it's got some negative aspects to it.
And the more we separate ourselves from other people with using technology as our interface.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Podcast.
Yeah.
Oh God, what have we done?
Well, and also like someone was talking to me the other day, my friend Jenna, about how like we've fallen into this idea, not that we shouldn't find fulfillment in our work, but that in the 20th century, kind of late 20th century, we got this idea that what we do for a living has to be like the optimal, fulfilling, emotionally,
Right.
On every level thing, like your dream, basically, versus a way to support your family and a way to live and a way to fulfill your vocation as a human,
And that sometimes there should be a daily drudgery,
Right.
So, a father, a mother, whoever's supporting their family, that this is from the Garden of Eden. This is how we come to know love again, by the sweat of our brow, and Pope Francis would say the daily martyrdom of the father,
Right.
which if you take it as you're sacrificing for your family, and for in service to God, then it's no longer drudgery,
Right.
unfortunately. So that suffering it turns that suffering into
The
joy.
yoke is easy and light.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Who else says that?
I know, right? I think I've heard that before. Well, and it also
Well, I was going to say, like, Buddha does not offer that.
it's true. Well, and it also kind of ties into abortion, because I feel like for a lot of people, the fear that maybe hits with a pregnancy is that sort of someone used the term with us, FOMO, fear of missing out. I don't know if that's a thing. We had never heard it before.
I was thinking the Fomus Piccati when you said that.
Which I don't know
It
what that
rises in it's the bubbling up of sin. It's like
Sounds
almost onomatopoetic.
Yeah, gotcha. But just the fact that we've been so instilled in modernity with this idea of like living your best life and following your dreams, and to be clear, we're not saying that people should live lives of emptiness and drudgery, like to have healthy goals and stuff, but that I think that's part of what drives some people to have an abortion, is this idea, this sort of mistaken idea that like, oh gosh, my life will be ruined and I won't get to live out that fulfillment and that beautiful life that I had envisioned for myself. That probably ain't going to happen the way you thought it was anyway,
Right. It's like when I was in school, so I studied risk management, right? So risk management is all about weighing, the risk versus the reward. And I'm not exaggerating. My professor in class one time used the analogy. He's like, "Yep." He's like, "We now go party this weekend. 50 cents in the vending machine is much better than 180 grand. Once 9 months later when that kid comes."
Oh my gosh.
But people think about economic terms like
cost benefit analysis.
Having children. Yeah, I mean, it's a real thing if people aren't prepared for it. But again, that's the divorce between the language of the body and what our bodies actually say versus what we want them to say.
Right. Isn't it interesting too that like if we're confronted with the cost of like our cell phone and internet and all these different things, which to an extent have become sort of necessities in the modern like professional world, but if we're confronted with those costs, it's like, well, no, I have to just make it work, kind of thing.
Right.
Like I'll make it work. I'll do what I have to do to keep these things. But wait, this child is going to cost me money? Oh, that's not going to work. I'm not going to be able to swing that,
And isn't this such a statement of theology of the body, in terms of utilitarianism, using people, loving objects, right? That we quantify a child in terms of how much more bedroom space is, his material goods. We're going to need an extra phone line. We're going to need an extra car. We're going to have to pay for college.
Right.
All this sum of material goods that's the calculus that goes into a child, right? But that's not the point at all.
No.
Yeah.
Well, and so the inverse of that, right? We talk about, avoiding economic hardship. I remember actually, so kind of tying back to our conversation of overpopulation, I did a partial study one time in school on the effects on the economy after Roe versus Wade.
Mm-hmm.
Like actually looking at population statistics as to like how much tax revenue has the government missed out on from all these people that have been
How many
gone.
fewer people paying into Social Security?
Right. How many fewer business owners are out there? Like how many, how has the economy been impacted with the change, that we've had? And nobody has that conversation.
Well, it's actually, not too long ago, like not too long before the New York abortion law thing happened, there was an article going around about how the U.S. population is not making enough babies.
Yeah, we're entering negative population growth.
So like, it's just ironic, It's like, wow, then go figure.
I've never thought before about the fact that Social Security was kind of set up like a pyramid scheme, and now now the pyramid has kind of turned into a column of sorts. Like, or maybe not. Maybe I'm misspeaking.
Well, that's a different conversation. But yeah, it's.
I'm not trying to diss Social Security per se. I just.
No.
Everyone else.
Well, I did like most of my senior projects. I did most of my senior projects on Social Security, so I'll definitely diss it with you. But it's definitely a different conversation.
Word.
I mean, Social Security is meant to be like a floor of protection.
Not your whole.
For people.
Yeah.
Right. However, yes, it has become inverse. But one of the issues with Social Security is that because the government somewhat, quote unquote, foresaw that the needs for that would not be as great in the future, they started robbing from it, and they started allocating capital to different places. So that's why there are huge shortfalls in Social Security.
Do you mean that politicians just mess up everything for everybody else?
It's interesting. It really is.
Wait, kind of bringing it back to like the kind of, it's interesting, like what we're talking
about. Because I'm a Social Security disability attorney, at times, and we need to get off this topic fast.
I'm trying to pull us away from it. Yeah,
pull me from the edge.
Pulling it away. Like with Thanos, it's interesting how like a lot of people have this idea of overpopulation, and then Thanos brings it to its head and says, "Well, if we have overpopulation, then here's the solution." Right, but he's a villain, right?
Yeah. Like that they made that plot choice.
They made that plot choice, exactly. Like the Marvel writers decided that, hey, this is a good decision, and they could have easily gone with the comic book version of it. They would have had to introduce one more character, but they could have gone with the comic book version. They didn't have to introduce this new philosophy, and yet they did. So it's just an interesting choice, in my opinion. Like, that we see the villain as being this guy with this overpopulation idea and wanting to fix overpopulation. Yeah, and then that kind of brings us to, how do people propose fixing overpopulation? Well, one of the ways is abortion.
Yeah.
Controlling the population.
Margaret Sanger,
Yeah, unfortunately, Margaret Sanger also wanted to control the...
Purify.
Exactly,
right.
Purify. To get rid of the undesirables, as she called them.
Which, I mean, really has become kind of a reflection on Darwinism and survival of the fittest, right? Like natural selection.
Well, she actually... Charles Darwin actually... Or she read Charles Darwin's book, and that's why she... like promoted this idea. Like, she was a proponent of Darwinism.
Right. So you're saying that natural selection, abortive selection, is now going to favor big Catholic families.
See.
Comes full circle.
It does beg the question, though, like, if we talk about overpopulation, who is the judge and jury as to who is part of that overpopulation,
Which
right?
I thought that... Yeah.
Who should not live any further?
Which...
Like, what population, what demographic, what countries, like, how's that even chosen?
Which Infinity Wars kind of highlights that, too, I guess. The fact that it's like, it kind of has to almost be just across the board, or else it's genocide. I mean, it's still genocide.
A random snap of the finger.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what he said. It was like, no judgment, just, like,
no discrimination.
The population, no discrimination, and take anybody. But it's... And then kind of bringing that back to us, right? Having a conversation about... overpopulation with people who are serious about overpopulation and saying that abortion helps control overpopulation. You can ask them the question, well, if the world is overpopulated, let's say that it is overpopulated, don't you think it would be quicker and easier to maybe kill all the 2-year-olds? Bringing the idea
to kill all the
92-year-olds, exactly. Bringing out this idea of what's the difference between the 2-year-old, the 92-year-old, and the unborn, right?
Where can we lead that conversation? What is the difference? And trying to what they call trotting out the toddler, so that you can have a conversation about what is the unborn.
Yeah, and y'all give that presentation, ProLife Encounters, and that I've used that lots. That isn't it a mnemonic, trotting out the toddler?
There are steps to trotting out the toddler. Like it's a tot, TOTT.
Can you not remember?
I can't remember it right now.
I know.
Look at that.
I know.
Wow.
Well, I thought it was basically.
Come back here, toddler.
Yeah, right. Get back.
I thought it was.
It's been a long time since I've talked about
it. But like the words that are coming to mind, I thought it was basically acknowledge the seriousness of the situation that they just presented, but then offer a situation with a toddler and ask, would it be okay to kill a toddler in that situation? And then say, okay, so it's not so much the situation that justifies the killing of a person, it's that you think somehow the unborn is... But what I just said is not really it. It's similar to that. But,
yeah, basically.
But, yeah, that was like an off-brand TOTT.
And we can leave that as a cliffhanger.
Right.
So that we'll come back to that in the future. Because I think...
we're rusty.
Yeah, we're a little rusty. And this podcast brought to you by ProLife Encounters. We're out of practice, but we're still great.
So I've been wanting to. It's weird because Thanos and the Infinity Crisis, or not the Crisis on Infinite Worlds, but the Infinity Stones. It's interesting. I hadn't really made the connection until we started talking, but I just happened to be reading Blackest Night. Cody, have you heard of that before? It's basically it's a story arc, a plot arc in the Green Lantern series.
No, I haven't. I'm not big into DC.
I wasn't either, and then I read this, and I was I just actually finished the first volume today, and it is very good. But basically, it's the same sort of thing. Just as Thanos is the big bad for that Marvel universe, and it brings the Avengers together. Mm-hmm. Same with the Justice League. This does this a little peripheral to the Justice League, but this brings all the bad guy in here, which is basically all the Green Lanterns. The Green Lanterns are the green section of the light spectrum, right? And recently in Green Lantern, they've been doing the whole spectrum of light. So you've got, Roy G. Biv, mm-hmm. right? Red, orange, yellow. You've got your green, and then even indigo and violet. So what happens here is it's kind of cosmological, because you've got now a black lantern, which is just darkness and death, right? Thanos.
Right.
And, there's the whole death connection there. But in the end, what conquers the death, spoiler alert, is all the light combines into white light, and even have a white lantern. But it's there some really cool lines about, after the whole let there be light thing, about life. You find out that the big bad's kind of been resurrecting people, and that resurrection, it wasn't just them being manipulated back into life, that they chose life. And there's actually a line, Green Lantern says it, we all chose life when given the chance. It's like basically the climax of Blackest Night is we all chose life when given the chance.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah, and I was like, well, dang. That seems like a pro-life statement.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There are so many
Call me crazy.
pro-life statements throughout a lot of the Marvel comics, movies, anything like that. There's so many different things that you can see in different movies and TV shows and comics that if taken kind of just as a phrase by itself, on face value, it's like, holy cow. That is crazy.
I remember, a little off topic, but I remember when Superman movie came out, I forget which one exactly it was. Superman Returns.
We're not talking about my 1985, 83.
No, we're talking about the
movies.
more modern one with Henry Cavill.
Not Christopher Reeves.
But
Stash,
in
though.
the scene, but I mean, Superman, he never kills anyone, right? Like his whole thing is like, don't
Right.
kill.
Yes.
But in this movie,
So much for that.
he kills Zod.
Mm.
And I remember everyone was so shocked about that because, like, Superman doesn't kill
I
people.
didn't
Like,
know that.
what?
That's interesting.
Spoiler
Yeah.
alert! Spoiler alert!
I know,
Oh
spoiler.
no, I
sorry.
knew he
But-
killed
Seen
Zod.
it.
I didn't
It's
know that
just-
was.
yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't know that was part of his
Yeah, but no-
persona that he doesn't kill.
right. It's kind of like Batman with no guns, right? Like every
Exactly,
superhero
yeah.
has his
Batman.
principle, but Superman does not kill. And so, like in that scene where he like, he ends Zod like that. I remember being shocked. I'm like, whoa! Like, why did they do that? That's not Superman. Like it was completely contradictory to, again, like you said, that pro-life message that are kind of inherent in most superheroes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then even like Doctor Who, I was reading this. Mary shared this meme list of pictures of basically quote a movie that basically sums up pro-life.
This was not mine. Like I shared
Yeah,
it.
she shared
It was.
Yeah. And one of them was from
Oh, yeah, I think I
Doctor
saw
Who, and the doctor says 900 years of time and space, and I've never met anyone who wasn't important.
There were a lot of great quotes.
Yeah, there's
from
a lot of
movies.
great quotes from movies, but there were like tons from Doctor Who, which
Yeah,
was
there were a
very
lot.
interesting.
Which is extraordinary coming from England, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
It like kind of shows how like I don't know. I feel like deep down people like I'm almost hesitant to say this because I was just talking to another friend today about how part of what's been so discouraging about the New York thing is that for so long so many pro-choice people that I'm like Facebook friends with, it's like, oh, stop being so like obviously we're not talking about killing like fully formed babies. We're just talking about those early stages where it's just a cell or a few cells, not second, third trimester. Don't be so upset,
Yeah.
And now it's like kind of the truth comes out that like the loyalty to being pro-choice runs deeper than the horror that should be felt.
Oh yeah.
But that at the same time, the fact that there are so many pro-life quotes in a lot of these movies kind of betrays the fact that deep down we know that life is a good to be preserved and that we need to work for quality of life too, but that it's not like, oh, no quality of life, well, you're done, but rather like we're going to defend your life and protect it, or at least that I think people realize that about their own life in a sense, and hopefully that carries over to other people's. It should carry over to other people's lives, to realize that too.
I'll say, and too, like one of the things this is doing is, unfortunately, as we get closer and closer to that line, it's making more people have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have y'all seen the movie Gosnell?
No.
I haven't. I did help fund it on Kickstarter though, way back in the day.
Awesome. High five. Well, we had a showing. we had a showing here at UL, like as they were doing a lot of the production. And the lady that helped to develop it and wrote the book, she is not religious. She is not anyone who was actually for a pro-life cause. She was a journalist who was researching the Gosnell story. And just in her research from the story, her life was changed. And so the message that they've done with the movie and what she does is really challenges people to actually have the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And when you actually challenge them to have a conversation about it and make them try to solidify or explain what they actually believe, very few people actually can.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah,
And so she
coherent.
She even told this. She even told the story. Sorry to cut you off. She even told the story when they were doing the Audible version for their book. The person who was doing the directing for her while she was reading, she found her outside crying.
Wow.
Because she had neshe heard those things before, right? So, she's like, she said when she went in, she's like, oh, you have a really great book, I really enjoyed it. And she's like, yeah, I bet you read it.
Yeah.
And she said as she was reading it for the Audible, production, she said she found the girl that was doing the directing for her reading, like outside crying because she'd never been challenged with that before.
And that reminds me of Unplanned. The Abby Johnson movie is going to come out or post-production. And the actress who portrays Abby Johnson, I mean, I don't think the movie resulted in her changing her mind on abortion, but I think she had something earlier in her life, not unlike Abby Johnson.
I think,
But
isn't there
oh,
something
go
about that once she was in the movie, if I'm wrong about this, people can call me out on it, but I thought it was that once she took the role and started doing it, her mother expressed to her that she was almost aborted.
Oh, I think you're exactly right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that was pretty awesome that movie would serve as a vehicle for that sort of
that conversation.
But what Mary...
Go ahead.
What Mary had said, and I think what Colby had said, is as Catholics, as pro-lifers, as people that aren't formed in a philosophical tradition, it kills us that there can exist this fundamental contradiction in the truth. That they can have these pro-life messages everywhere, but then they can still support partial birth abortion. That huge, massive contradiction, but to a postmodernist, which is, we're seeing the expression of that, and these sorts of New York statutes.
Right.
A postmodernist, truth doesn't have to be without contradictions. Truth is not. They're not pursuing truth, and contradictions are just fine so long as you are, fighting the power structure or whatever it is.
Right. Or like that everyone should live their own truth and that all truths are equal, but the consequence of that is that all people are not. Like that the founder of Feminists for Life had this quote that if all choices are equal... if all people are equal, all choices are not.
Wow.
So just what you were saying about the truth thing, that there is no absolute truth. Now it's all living your truth, which isn't truth at all. It's a odd use of the word. And that we should respect the truth of each person over and above the actual value and rights of that person to go on living.
Right. Which, the problem with that, and this is coming from about, I guess, somewhere around 800, 900 conversations on college campuses with different students talking about abortion and kind of life in general, the value of life and philosophy. Basically, like this relativistic mindset that, that whatever's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me. Problem with that is that most people don't know what is true for them. Like, they don't quite understand it yet. Like,
it's ever changing.
It's ever changing. It's always changing. Like, I had a conversation with one guy. Oh my gosh, this is ridiculous, right? Yeah. So he said, he said things can exist and not exist at the same time. And I said, dude, please explain.
Schrodinger's cat.
Explain that to me. And he explained Schrodinger's cat, and I said, no, because either the cat is dead or alive. It doesn't matter if we know that it's dead or alive. The cat is either dead or alive. Our perception does not change the fact that it is either dead or it is alive. So Schrodinger was an idiot.
Right.
So and then he turned and he pointed at the building and he said, "See that building right there?" I said, "Yes." He said, "That building exists, but if it were that all of a sudden it were to blow up and crumble down into pieces, it would no longer exist." I said, "Exactly. It would no longer exist. It doesn't exist and not exist at the same time." Like, it was just incredible.
And did y'all see that video? It's James Franco, the actor.
I saw it.
And his buddy, and they're like interviewing. His buddy's a philosopher, I think, and they're interviewing other philosophers. And there's a lady that they're interviewing.
Now, wait, time out. When you say he's a philosopher, like, everybody and their mama's a philosopher. What do you mean?
Yeah, let me preface it.
Olaf is a love expert.
Olaf is a love expert, exactly.
Well, they, I want to say that their profession, such as it is, they teach philosophy.
Okay.
Those guys. Some of our favorite guys.
So, which, there's plenty of good ones out there.
Are.
But so this philosopher, this professor at one of the West Coast schools was saying that whether or not abortion is okay depends on whether or not the baby's wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And if the baby survives, ergo she's wanted. And so James Franco's like, well, wait a second. Isn't that circular?
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, well, I understand how you might be thinking that.
I can see how you would fall into that flawed way of thinking.
Yeah, so let's see. I have a summary of this talk here, of the circularity of
But I
this
mean, but
talk.
isn't it sad that the world has come to this idea of a person's value is dependent upon whether or not they are wanted?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that their existence is contingent on the perception of another person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was
Yeah.
thinking about it, and I was like, so by that standard, let's say there's a woman who's I don't know, alone in the world, maybe living on the street, and has no one in her life. So she's not valued seemingly by anyone, and she's raped by a man.
And it has no economic value.
Right. And she's raped by a man who has a loving family and friends and all these people. So by this standard that we've set up, he is valuable, way more valuable than she is, as opposed to that they actually have equal intrinsic value, and that she's being treated in a way that's not in keeping with that value, and he's acting in a way that's not in keeping with that value. You know? Like, it's just bananas. It's completely bananas, the logic.
Yeah, I doubt that.
Okay, so the summary that I have from the James Franco, this is how you can encapsulize it. It's not a baby because I don't want it, but that's okay because me not wanting the baby unbabyfies the baby and makes it okay not to want an unbabyfied baby. You see, there's no circularity to that logic at all.
It's insane. It's insane.
Bananas.
I just feature like a murderer from like a classic horror movie, like standing over their victim before they kill them and be like, but you understand the fact that I'm killing you, like, renders you not valuable, and therefore it's okay that I'm killing you. So are we good? Like, we're on the same page here. We understand one another.
Oh yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
Yeah. You're so fun.
But to get back on a serious note, how about that? So one of the most popular songs back in the 70s, I don't know if you remember, but Cheap Trick. It's like, I Want You to Want Me, where we talk about,
Want
you to want me. Right. Like, it's this, this thing of like wanting, like we want other people to want us.
I
like,
need you to need me.
I need you to need me, right? So like our personhood is depending upon other people wanting us. And so it makes sense about how people are unpersonified, or, they're not persons if they're not wanted. And that, gets projected onto the homeless. It gets projected onto those in poverty, like all these different things.
Yeah, the most vulnerable of us.
Yeah, but it kind of, I guess, tossed in a personal story. One of the biggest moments in my life was, and actually the biggest regret I have in my life, and I'll say this publicly, was the way that I treated my brother growing up.
But he turned out so well.
And I'll tell you why, right? So when I was a kid, I was 4 years old, my brother was born, I wanted a sister. I wanted a sister so bad, right, that when he was born in the hospital, they came out and said, oh, you have a baby brother. And I was like, no, I don't. Put him back. I wanted a sister, right?
You have made a mistake.
So for years, I resented my brother because I wanted a sister. And I remember this very vividly, but one time we were arguing, we fought like cats and dogs, like till we were teenagers. And I remember this. So like he was like 10, 11 years old, and I was like 14 or 15. And we were fighting about something, and he yelled at me. He said, "You're the worst brother I could ever have." And I shouted back,
"You're the worst sister I've ever had."
No. I shouted back, "That's okay. I never even wanted a brother."
Don't. You've been holding on to that for like a decade.
And the hurt on his face that I can still see. And so the biggest reconciliation moment we had was a couple years later, after we both had a pretty serious conversion. And I remember, like, we sat down, we were at a retreat center at the same time at different retreats. And I remember that moment coming up when I was, doing some reconciliation, and I was like, wow, like all the angst and stuff that my brothers had growing up is my fault because of the way that I treated him. Like, I didn't want him around, and so all of his acting out, all of his like trying to get attention from me was because I didn't want him.
Right.
Wow.
And so, like, our reconciliation moment where I sat down and asked him, like, hey, do you forgive me for the ways that I treated you and the ways that I didn't treat you well? And it was that moment that everything changed and we became best friends.
Yeah,
When I realized that I actually wanted my brother around, life was totally different.
Mm-hmm.
it's so crazy
It's
because
probably
as long
mean-
as I've known you guys, y'all have,
Yeah.
Y'all been brothers.
Been close?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, and it's interesting that our value is not determined by how other people treat us, but our own vision of ourselves. Can be shaped by the way that people treat us. And so we have to acknowledge that and create that distinction between value and self-worth, I guess.
Or like that we should value people, but just because someone doesn't value you doesn't mean that you're not valuable. Is that what you're saying?
Basically.
That I put so succinctly.
Yeah, that you have inherent value.
Right.
Well, yeah, one thing I would toss in there is that even if we don't receive value from person to person, from our peers or our family or whatever, our intrinsic value, as you said, it comes from God wanting us.
Mm-hmm. Whose we are.
Right? God, right. We belong to God. We are the beloved, right? God loves us regardless of others. And so our value as a person, first and foremost, and above all else, comes from Him.
The Imago Dei.
Yeah.
We are created in the image of God, and that's a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
And Colby, I think you're in pretty good company. You're probably destined for greatness with this fraternal strife because, I mean, look at salvation history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cain and Abel, Isaac and Ishmael, Joseph and his brothers,
Yeah,
Northern
good
and
job.
Southern
You didn't
Kingdom.
shove them into a pit or kill them.
Or sell them into slavery.
Right. Or steal his inheritance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yet. There was that really
I don't know
nice
if I-
coat he had.
Yeah. My dad's not blonde and I don't have sheepskin, so we'll be okay.
Nice.
So one thing that we have not done yet, even though we've done it without doing it, is Cody, how do you say that segment that we do?
What you reading?
Gosh, I hate that.
Should we just make a recording and put it on a button that way we can just do it?
Yeah, like in his most high-pitched possible voice.
We'll have to get someone with a soundboard. That way we have all that stuff already pre-programmed.
Yeah, somebody hired tech. But so, what are y'all reading?
I've
Not
been
much,
reading
huh?
a particularly wonderful interpretation of Goodnight Moon nightly.
Several
I'm on
times.
my 45th reading of it, actually.
And a little old lady saying, "Hush." Whenever Ashton tells me to hush, I say, "And a little old lady saying."
I'm sure she loves that.
I just think of a bowl of mush.
I know. Well, I do too. Yeah, good times. Good times.
I'm sorry. So y'all were saying.
So I guess I'll go real quick. I'm reading. I just finished the Thanos Gauntlet series, the Infinity Stone series, which was a very interesting read. The twist at the end is really, really neat. I don't want to give any spoilers, but I kind of hope they take the same approach in the new movie.
Which almost guarantees that they're not going to take
I know, but it's very. It's
You're like,
pretty
dang
cool.
it, they already did this.
But I will tell you, per our conversation 2 episodes ago about Wolverine making an appearance in the comic series, Wolverine is there, and he is like one of the only one, like I think the only one that gets an attack in on Thanos. But unfortunately, Thanos then just removes his adamantium skeleton. So,
good, because that
dang.
that was not fun going on.
right. But yeah, so I finished reading that. It was
interesting, very, very exciting read. And I'm working on Walking Dead Volume 28. And then I'm working
27.
on Space Salvi. The encyclical. I know, right? Walking Dead and
that's the one on hope, right?
Hope and salvation,
which is kind of funny in light of Walking Dead.
I know, that's what I was. Yeah, that's why I was commenting. It's pretty funny. And then I started on Fides et Ratio and Confessions by Augustine. So yeah, that's what I'm reading.
I don't think you read enough.
I know, right? The reason I'm doing this is because I didn't read enough, and now I'm like playing catch up. And also, I'm doing this thing called Exodus 90. I don't know if you guys have heard of it.
Yeah. Yep.
Scott's.
Yeah.
I did it last year.
It's pretty awesome.
I avoided it this year.
Yes. What's funny because like we have the group of guys that I did it with, we still have a group text going, and we'll share stuff back and forth. But like, I mean, when you're in the group, we were talking every single day,
right?
And so like one of the guys proposed like in the group this year, like, hey, I want to do it again. Everybody was like, nah, that's okay.
No,
I've got something else going on.
One of the benefits is that it has called me back to wanting to read philosophy and theology more. So that's
Fides et Ratios. That's a great blend of the two, and I feel like it's kind of like a lot of Shakespeare. You can read it many, many, many times.
Yeah. I read it in seminary, so yes, absolutely. I've already started. I'm already like mind blown, like still kind of comprehending these things again.
The my book of the week is it's called 40 Dreams of St. John Bosco. Are y'all familiar with St. John Bosco?
Not entirely, but I mean I know him.
He's basically a patron saint for all children, but
he was a magician, right?
Oh, was he? Is he a patron saint of magicians?
I think so. I have a friend of mine who's a magician, and I want to say that's his patron.
I think that's right, because he had this way of captivating children.
Right, he would work with children like in the streets, like to get their attentions.
Yeah, that's right. I do remember that's part of the story. So we've got, not unlike the Allen brothers, we've got two boys, kind of side by side in age, and they can cause mass chaos. So for our girls, we feel like Saint Philomena has kind of adopted them, and for our boys, we feel like Saint John Bosco's kind of adopted them. But Saint John Bosco, he had these very formative dreams, very vivid dreams, growing all through his life, and some that he'd have repeatedly. And a lot of his dreams are either straight up prophetic or just prescient. So it's but can be very apocalyptic. So it's kind of like a Catholic comic book.
Okay.
It's good stuff.
Okay.
So I just finished one book today for the fourth time, I believe. The Big Short.
Oh, yeah.
By Michael Lewis. Well, I mentioned this to you at lunch last week.
That's right.
I have a just fascination with unfettered financial market speculation. And so I've read that book several times. Like it captivates me every single time. But
and so Aaron Sorkin didn't write the book. He just did the dialogue for the movie, right? I mean, he wrote the screenplay.
Right.
Wow.
And I will say, actually, the movie, the screenplay, is fairly decent with the book. Some of the names are changed because some of the characters or the people in the story didn't want to actually be identified. But for the most part, the overarching theme of it is pretty well done. So anyways, just finished that one. And then I just got a copy recently of Jesus and the Jewish Roots of Mary by Dr. Brant Petrie.
I've heard good things about that man.
Me too. And he's got these really
we should have him on the podcast.
I've not read it yet, but I've got it.
Word.
Probably will start reading it this week though. So I guess our next episode I'll be that's my what you're reading.
Oh, good.
We just
And-
acquired. What books did we? Well, we just got last weekend. We went to see Garden the musical and got
Oh, yeah.
and
Oh,
we're
yeah.
given the little Garden book along with our tickets. We have that book. Like basically, we've just been given a
That-
bunch of books that we have not started reading. And then we heard Scott Hahn this past Saturday at Tulane.
Oh, I forgot that was
Friday.
I'm sorry, Friday. At my alma mater, Tulane.
I didn't know you went to Tulane.
I did for undergrad.
She
Wow.
graduated
Yeah.
from Tulane.
Yeah. Even better than going there.
Exactly.
And they were giving out a book of his called what is it called?
It's a great question.
Something Our Father, about understanding the petitions of the Our Father, in light of the Father. And we got a wonderful photo.
I was going to say a father who keeps his promises.
No,
but it's
no.
Not that.
No.
No.
And we got a wonderful photo with the back of Scott Hahn's head, because there
Excellent.
were 200 people waiting in line to see him. So we just worked with what we got. So we've had this sudden influx of Catholic books being thrown at
So
us.
that brings up
Understanding Our Father.
Yes, that's it. Which it's interesting.
that makes sense.
Because it's not understanding the Our Father, even though I think it does talk. I just thought it was interesting that it's. He said it's specifically about the prayer of the Our Father, but that it's. I think from what he said, like understanding God as our Father from the petitions within the Our Father, which I thought was interesting.
That brings up a good point, because Scott Hahn spoke at the Men of the Immaculata Catholic Men's Conference last year,
Right.
and we're getting close to the men's conference. I'm busy right now, kind of. I'm not going to say revising, because that would be shameful, but I'm updating the language a bit of Thomas A. Kempis as quoted in St. Louis de Montfort's Marian consecrations, just to make it a little easier for the men to read, because we're going to do a Marian consecration this year. But our guests, Father Donald Calloway, who I mentioned last podcast, I listened to a great podcast that he did. I listened to it this past week. He did an interview, I think it was from this past week, with Dr. Taylor Marshall, who's also an Aggie.
You would.
Wait, clap right there so we can cut that out.
Now nobody's going to understand our references to clapping. Anyway, it was about the Rosary, because Father Calloway's written these books, Champions of the Rosary. But a couple cool things that I learned from that podcast: the reason that religious will wear the Rosary on their left side. Do y'all know the reason for this?
Because
Y'all,
it's like a
this
sword.
may be common
You're
knowledge.
supposed to grab it with your right
Because
hand.
Yeah, it's a sword on your hilt. Yeah.
Whereas all this time
Yes.
I thought it was personal preference which side you wore it on. Did not know that there was a standard.
Well, that's also the idea of when you're escorting someone, like arm in arm, the man's supposed to have his right arm free, so he's supposed to escort with the left hand, so that he could grab the sword to defend if necessary.
Oh, I thought that was based on which side of the street you're on and where the chamber pots are being
We're
thrown.
talking about a different.
I mean, that too.
I was going to say the different time
Yeah,
before
different
vehicles,
times.
but no, then
Yeah.
you took it a
Chamber
step further.
pots. Nice.
Wait, the different aspects of truth and how they pertain to the
Yeah.
circumstance.
Oh boy.
That just determines which side of the street you walk on, like left side of the street or right side of the street, so that you have both access to your sword and blocking the chamber pot. Splash.
This is like
You could block the chamber pot with your sword.
yes.
this is breaking my mind.
I'm sure everyone else's as well.
The other cool thing I learned from Father Calloway was they talked about Bartolo Longo, Blessed Bartolo Longo. Have y'all ever heard of him?
No.
No.
Another one of our awesome Italian saints / blesseds, but he did not begin awesome. He was actually an ordained priest, Satanist priest,
Whoa.
and the Rosary led him out of that some kind of way. I don't remember the story, but he felt called to Pompeii. This was, I think, the end of the 19th century, so archaeological expeditions into the aftermath of Vesuvius's eruption had not begun yet. So there was nothing in Pompeii, and he decided to build this massive cathedral in the ruins of Pompeii, or atop the ruins of Pompeii, and as a cathedral to the Rosary. And one of the cool things about it, when he finished, he just gave it to the Pope. I think it was Pope Leo at the time. I can't remember if it was the 10th or 13th, but who wrote like 12 or 13 encyclicals on the Rosary. So this Pope was huge on the Rosary, gladly accepted this cathedral, and this cathedral is its own diocese.
Oh my God!
It has its own bishop, and Father Calloway, who's been, who leads pilgrimages everywhere. He's leading a pilgrimage to the Holy Land later this year with Jim Caviezel. He said it was the prettiest, most impressive church he's ever been in.
That's a big statement.
Yeah. Crazy. So, another reason to go to Pompeii.
And I already had such a long list.
Yeah. See, there's the volcano.
The mummy type people things. Not quite mummies.
Exactly.
I guess that begs the question, was the volcano a movement of nature to cure overpopulation?
Boom.
Well, obviously.
Oh, man.
That was just Vulcan or Hephaestus, depending on your bent, getting angry.
Right.
So, I think we are nearing the time.
I'm sorry. I had something I wanted to add about Thanos that I had forgot to, or not about Thanos, but about Infinity War, if I could.
Definitely.
Just real quick. That one of my favorite quotes from Infinity War is when Vision offers basically suggests that the quickest way to defeat Thanos is to destroy one of the Infinity Stones, namely the one that kind of gives him his existence. And Captain America says, "No, we don't trade in lives." And
we don't deal in trading.
I'm pretty sure we don't trade in lives.
Okay.
Pretty sure. But we can argue about it later.
Okay.
But
marriage. That's what it's about, baby.
Basically that I thought it was really kind of pertinent, particularly like to embryonic stem cell research. The idea that we do not take one human and sacrifice them for another human being, especially one that, in the case of embryonic stem cell research, that is not even volunteering to do this, versus Vision actually was volunteering.
Right.
And of course,
we cannot do good by doing evil.
Right. Exactly. And of course, not even getting into the whole thing of like that adult stem cells have been more effective and, yada, yada, yada. But what was interesting, I thought, was I was looking for that quote. And what I found was a bunch of memes of people saying like Captain America says this, but then has no problem going to battle with all these Wakandans and sacrificing all of their lives and stuff, and trying to turn it into this thing as though Captain America is somehow inconsistent in that way. And what struck me was how that's something that through kind of that philosophical background that we were talking about, that as Catholics we have, is that we recognize that just because the ends are the same doesn't mean that the means are equal. And the idea that so many people honestly don't see the difference between them, which of course they do end up attempting to kill, or they don't, but Scarlet Witch does end up trying to kill Vision, but that there is a distinct intrinsic difference in sacrificing a person, in killing them to try to save other people, intentionally killing them, willfully killing them, versus going to war with people and fighting to try to save everybody. You get what I'm saying? Like,
and this is legitimate defense, right? Because bad dudes
has stated his intentions very clearly.
Yeah, and they're attacking your home country. And I mean, these aren't just some other sovereign nation, right, that's trying to get land. These are, what are those crazy looking things in Black Panther? They're like, hell beasts or something like
Yeah.
that.
Right.
They look like things out of the Hunger Games.
Right. Well, and when
yeah.
you say he's attacking their home country, by home country we mean the universe, because he's attacking like everyone.
And specifically Wakanda.
Right. But he's attacking everyone, and just I was just kind of blown away by the fact that people honestly thought that people honestly think that Captain America is somehow wrong in saying we don't trade in lives, because then he's willing to go fight with other people, even though some of them will lose their lives.
Well, with a name like Captain America, of course he's going to be wrong, right?
All the time,
Right.
every day, all day, every day.
Middle-aged cisgendered white man. I mean, he can't say anything right.
Yeah, facial hair.
So
Why,
I found the
why
script.
didn't we kill Captain America? That would have solved everything.
Found the script. We don't trade lives.
We don't trade
That's what he
lives.
says.
Okay, I'm wrong.
So surprised. I'm just kidding.
Well, you were wrong too.
I was closer.
You were closer.
Closer.
Married life. It's all about
Married
who's
life.
closer.
Bliss.
But yeah.
Okay, have we squeezed all the juice out of Thanos?
Probably not. There's so much.
No, we're
there.
talking about him next week.
That's how.
Well, I guess here's another one. Here's another one. So I found an article that actually talked about what you're talking about, but one of the questions I guess we can kind of end with just on a cliffhanger. So we talk about overpopulation getting to a certain point. Like what is the actual, I guess, equilibrium where things are just kind of smooth and on coasting? Because one of the paragraphs from this article says, of course, life being what it is, it would eventually overpopulate again, and Thanos would have to do this thing again.
Yeah.
But if he's willing to cull every few centuries, he would theoretically achieve gargantuan boost in net welfare and fullness over time. He would be hated, but he would have produced more net utility than any being in history.
What?
He would be God. So basically,
That's just a whole chain of bad things.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. It's like it's a perpetual cycle that you do this snap once, but that doesn't stop the population from growing again. And so who then is going to step up and do this act that needs to be done? So what end? If we talk about if we talk about abortion, we talk about euthanasia. Even if those quote unquote have good ends that are intended that people may think is twisted, when does it actually stop?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I love when a villain is primary mover of the character is a philosophy, or specifically a heresy, right? I think there is so much richness to be, dark riches to be plundered, making villains out of these terrible philosophies, as opposed to. His family was killed and had a bad experience in Nam, and now he's the Punisher.
It's kind of interesting to think about that. Within the Marvel universe, I feel like the greatest villains are the ones that do have some sort of very, very deeply held philosophy, and the heroes too have a philosophy they kind of cling to, and that I'm kind of thinking Iron Man, out of all of them, he may be the one that's the most sort of lacking in a philosophy, or I don't know, him and Spider-Man maybe, and that isn't that we're kind of
Spider-Man's just a teenager.
Yeah, it's true. I love Iron Man. I'm not trying to diss Iron Man, but that to an extent, a lot of the problems that they run into as a whole perhaps kind of stem from the fact that a lot of times Iron Man's kind of flying by the seat of his pants as far as what he's fighting for, to an extent, so basically just that the greatest heroes kind of come from having a well thought out, deeply held set of beliefs, and sticking with them.
Well, I guess too that kind of points at one of the theories where Thanos and Iron Man are not equals, but when he tells him, you're not the only one cursed with knowledge, you talk about Iron Man flying by the seat of his pants, but I think one of the reasons he actually does fight, and one of the reasons he is involved, is because he does feel responsible with all the stuff that he knows.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and if he doesn't do it,
watch
who else will?
Yeah.
Right.
If you watch the first Iron Man movie, you can really capture, what Iron Man's essence is. Why he does what he does, and it's because of that interaction he had with that soldier in the beginning.
I forget exactly what the line was, but basically he saw that it was his missiles that caused this, and so that's what he was building a relationship with this guy. They were having a great time, and all of a sudden, his missiles destroyed everything, right? And so he kind of turned his life around at that point, feeling that responsibility.
I think it would be cool to draw parallels between the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, prudence, understanding, fortitude, fear of the Lord, wisdom, counsel, knowledge, and the Avengers. Right? We talked about maybe Iron Man, knowledge, fortitude, Captain America, counsel for the Vision. I mean,
I feel like wisdom would also be a really, like, Captain America, like, out of all of them, or I guess also Vision,
Yeah.
He has vision.
He does. He does.
But
would fear of the Lord be Hulk?
And just to be clear, I wasn't saying Iron Man doesn't have any philosophy. Obviously he does.
Oh, clearly you hate him. We get it.
I hate him so much. Obviously he does. He has a philosophy of pursuing what is good and of saving lives, but just that it's almost kind of like, I don't know, like Iron Man is kind of like someone, like an Old Testament father or something, like really this tremendous desire for good, but still not quite in full possession of all the information, and whereas whereas Captain America is like but really we know what we need, like he more knows what's up,
Yeah, and the question would have to be asked, like, where do we go with the Avengers? Like, did we go back to the beginning? Did we pull to the end? Like, what Avengers set are we talking about?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is in flux constantly.
That is like the nerdiest thing I've ever heard. Like the nerdiest dilemma I've ever heard.
Well, join us next week when we will
attempt
try to
for the lively
be even
debate.
nerdier.
And, reciprocate so you can also become nerdier. We have an upcoming... we have one of our first guests is coming up. That might be the next podcast or the one after that. His name's Zach Mabry, who y'all might remember as Porky from the Little Rascals. He's a Catholic convert, and he'll be joining us soon to talk about quality Catholic nerdery. So thank you for nerding out with us, the Catholic nerds. We hope your nerd power levels have increased. Please do subscribe to this podcast and share with all your friends,
Over
Catholic
9,
or not.
9,000. Sorry.
Over 9,000. Power levels.
Fade to
And
black.
Bum 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 bum.